Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Customizing Clinical Metadata Repositories and Statistical Computing Environments. My name is Margot, and I'll be your X-Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, with time for a question and answer session with our speaker. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speaker throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for future download. At this point, I'd like to thank Cortesian, who helped develop the content for this presentation. The founding members of Cortesian rely not only on their technical expertise, but on their experience as past clients of clinical service providers. Cortesian prides itself on its flexibility, responsiveness, adherence to client specifications, and timelines for all projects conducted anywhere in the world. Their long company history, wide geographic presence, high-quality standards, cost-effectiveness, fast turnaround time, and therapeutic expertise, as well as qualified, experienced, and talented employee capabilities, enhance their client benefits. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's event, Stephen Picardo. Stephen Picardo combines more than 30 years of life science industry experience and dedicated technology expertise with a record of success on the clinical data management and systems side, as well as a growing startup organization through sales and marketing leadership. Mr. Picardo joined Cortesian from Clinical Inc., where he served as Chief Commercial Officer. In this role, he was responsible for all Clinical Inc. global sales and marketing activities to drive market adoption of the company's industry-leading eSource products and solutions. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Mr. Stephen Picardo. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Margot. We'll share my screen. And welcome everyone to our webinar on metadata repositories, and statistical computing environments. My name is Steve Picardo, and I head up business development and commercial strategy for Cortesian. I'll talk a little about innovation. Basically, innovations can come in many different forms, but when you're looking to improve your processes, you need to think differently about your approach. Innovations are much more than just improving your existing process. It's actually thinking about things differently. And I think that's what we're going to demonstrate today, how we've developed these two technologies, what we've been able to provide, and how they may be applicable to your requirements in the industry. Just a brief one-slide overview on Cortesian and how long we've been in business for the past 16 years. We are a provider of global software development and clinical research services. Over 400 staff, closing in on 1,000 projects, and well over 165 customers. We have deep expertise in software development, as well as the stat programming and data management. We've actually developed our own technologies around EDC, MDR, metadata repositories, SCE, the Statistical Computing Environment, and data visualization. We're located globally. We're headquartered in the U.S. in the Princeton area, and we have resources in multiple offices in both the Ukraine and India. So first thing I want to do is get a flavor for the audience. So Margot is going to ask a few poll questions. Margot?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Picardo. So I'll be launching that poll question now, where you can vote in real time by clicking one of the following answers. So our poll question for today is, which of the following are you familiar with? Metadata repositories, statistical computing environments, both, or neither? And I'll give the audience just a couple more minutes to get in their answers. So I'll read that question out one more time. Which of the following are you familiar with? Metadata repositories, statistical computing environments, both, or neither? And it looks like the majority of our audience has voted. So I'll be sharing those answers. 63% of the audience voted neither, 25% of the audience voted both, and 13% of the audience voted metadata repositories. On that note, I'll hand it back to Stephen Picardo.
Great, thanks, Margot. And it's interesting. I wanted to get an idea of kind of the level of knowledge of these. These have been around, but might be relatively new to a lot of people. So it's good to understand there seem to be a fairly large amount that had not heard of this. We have a follow-on question for people that have experience with it. Margot?
Yes, our second poll question for today is, do you currently use the following: metadata repositories, statistical computing environments, both, or neither? So it looks like the audience is still getting in their answers, so we'll just give them a couple more moments to just select one of the following. And I'll be sharing those answers now. So 60% of the audience voted for, do you currently use the following? They said neither. Another 20% said statistical computing environments, with 10% voting metadata repositories and another 10% voting both. On that note, I'll hand it back to Mr. Picardo.
Great, thanks, Margot. So let's start with an overview of what a statistical computing environment is and how it can benefit you. We'll cover the main concepts of the computing environment, what people are currently doing, how a statistical computing environment can help improve your process, some of the key benefits, and finally look at some of the features that we have developed, which I think will be of interest to you. So it's all about communication, and that's really what the statistical computing environment was developed for. It becomes kind of the medium of communication for your teams. There are many different components needed in generating output, whether that's data sets, tables, listings, figures, whatever your output is. And these could be protocols and synopsises and shells and data sets and things of that sort. And there are many different moving parts with multiple versions of programs, dependencies, reviews, and approvals. And there's also many different players and people involved in this. So this requires a system to keep track and automate the processes that go on in generating this output. And that's really where the SCE comes in. It provides this level of traceability and also automation to help make this process much more fluid and much more compliant. So currently, this is pretty much the current system, which is fairly manual and prone to errors and lacks any real oversight or traceability. And that's what we all use every day. Outlook, email, Word, Excel, Skype for communication. So it involves what's been done since we've been programming, sending emails, attaching documents or other things. Manually running programs, whether it's SAS code or whatever code is needed, manually tracking versions, perhaps with naming conventions and things like that. So that's the model for a lot of people today, right? In developing and running the SAS output that's needed, and that's really where putting in a more formal system like a statistical computing environment in place comes in handy. Last thing around communication, we do spend a lot of time reading emails, and we end up using email as our workflow and tracking tool, which is not ideal. So that's one of the main benefits of moving towards a more formalized system is we don't have to rely on stuff being buried in emails and the requests or tasks being asked for through email. It can be done through a system which will allow you to have a much clear oversight of what's going on. So, what is statistical computing environment? Basically, it's one place to store and manage all of your project documentation. And this includes SAS code, protocols, specs, raw data, shells and mocks, data dictionaries, output logs, whatever. At a high level, this allows you to save time, since all this information that is needed to generate the output is in one spot. It's in one system. It's being controlled by one system. It's not stored in multiple places on file servers or drives or email. It's all in one system where there'll be controls in place. In addition, the communication is centralized so that collaboration becomes more simpler and more effective. And what this ends up leading to is better compliance with your SOPs, better tracking and auditability, especially when either internally or if you are a CRO, customers want to know what's going on and they want to be able to track what was generated when and by who to make sure things are accurate and compliant. Some of the benefits of this system, it basically provides one single source of truth for generating output. So that's where all this information is. Everybody can refer to this, and it allows for a much more compliant view of what's going on in generating your output. Typically, many resources work on a project, so traceability helps with resource allocation. It also allows for changes to resources with minimal impact. A lot of times, as I mentioned earlier, people come on and off projects. If they come into a project, they want to be able to see where things are, what were the versions that were used, where is the current status of the development of everything for a particular project or study. And all that information is in one spot and easily available to people that come in, and that really addresses a common everyday use case where it's not just one person that stays on a project forever. We need to have systems and the ability to have multiple people come on and come off projects, and also have them get up to speed very quickly. You'll see there a little bit about automation using MDR. We're going to talk later about metadata repository, but if you do have one or one developed, what we've been able to do is leverage the metadata that's stored in MDR to actually help drive and automate the CDIS dataset program generation through an API integration. So a lot of the data needed for STTM and ADAM program comes from your metadata about from your database. That information can automatically be imported into SCE, and then that can be used to drive automation and program generation. And then the other nice feature is once data is refreshed from, say, your EDC or repository, it's exported out the raw data and is put into the SCE. You can auto relaunch programs so that the action of reloading data from your repository, your data repository, can actually kick off programming jobs on an automatic basis. So as new data is refreshed, you can automate the process of rerunning the code. So this is really making that process much more efficient, and also alerting people when new information is available into the system. And then finally, of course, I think really important is role-based security. So the ability to have users and groups or roles where you can control access to who sees what, whether you can read data or not, blinded access, things like that. So there's a lot of benefit to having role-based security that you don't get in most systems or in most kind of manual process workflows that are out there. So I'm going to go over and show you some screenshots of some of the features of a statistical computing environment. So first is task assigning and programming in one place. With this system, as you can see here, is a task list. You can track all tasks for a project through configurable workflows. And this includes tracking the necessary documentation needed to run a project, like the specifications, the SAS code. You can also track in here the output and the QC review process. The system actually tracks where a particular program or project is against a defined workflow. You can see the workflow graph on the screen with the different colored balls. There's a green one, a yellow one, and some gray ones. They reflect the status of each defined event inside of this particular workflow, and they reflect different stages. So you not only can, you're not just running a program, you actually can help define what that workflow is, and this will track and let you know the different stages along the process, because a lot of times it isn't just one program that might be prerequisites for a program. It might be multiple programs that get run. The other big benefit is you'll have a repository for your SAS code, and this ability to check in and check out and version control. So this avoids duplication of effort, as well as quality issues that arise out of using the wrong version of a particular program. Basically, this is a repository, a code repository, one spot. With check-in, check-out, and versioning, you know exactly where you are. You can prevent people from making changes to the code if it's checked out, and you can version it. But it's all tied together in the system with the other tasks and workflows that are available. So this code then can be used to automatically generate output. Another a key feature is the traceability of what's going on. So code management and version control enabled more informed tracking of changes and updates. They have a study-wide activity log, can trace who's doing what, when, and who last touched the document. So now I can see here, it's just a couple simple examples here of who went in, who viewed it, if it was a change, an update, and now can get one spot, one view of all the activity going on in my study. And whether that's changes, whether people are coming in to look at things, maybe they have to review something. It's all in one spot, and it really helps in determining where the changes were made, when they were made, and to avoid any issues around not realizing something has been updated or someone has been into your project or study. Another nice feature is the ability to leverage the study metadata to drive the CDISC generation. So here is a list of study metadata files. These were actually loaded from an MDR system, but it can be loaded from other sources. And the data in here can actually be used to drive the CDISC dataset generation programs. So as data comes into here, this is the metadata about the study. You'll see edit checks and groups and mappings, elements, and things like that. This can be used in the SAS code, and if these documents are updated, say new code lists are added in, or new data set, the new variables are added to the data dictionary, and that's imported into this area, it'll automatically gets updated in the code, and the SAS code automatically reflects the new changes when it's relaunched. This avoids the manual updating of code when specifications change, code lists change, things like that. If you tie it into data that's here, if new data is refreshed and you added a couple more components to a code list, it's automatically reflected in your SAS code. So it's very, very handy in handling changes and updates. The other nice feature, and you'll see it here in this dependency graph, is the automation and code dependencies are really key to what's going on in the system. This graph is automatically generated. The view is from comments inside the SAS code. So the way we've implemented this is that for a particular customer is in the SAS code, you put certain comments, and then those comments are key. It'll actually read those comments, and it'll generate the dependency graph you see here. And this is a simple version, but there could be many dependencies. The output of this particular program could be the input to something else, and you can kind of stretch out the dependencies. And it allows you to kind of relaunch projects or programs using this tree, and it actually will auto launch the code, and it uses this dependency to run the code in the particular order. So a nice thing about that is you can define this, and then you can use this as a way to make sure you're following the steps that are needed. And this gives you more of a visual overview of the code, any dependencies, what kind of the code flow would be in developing that. So a very nice feature to not only see what's going on, but also to help automate the process. Finally, roles-based security allows you to control who can run or view programs, what type of access is granted, like you'll see on there, like blinded or unblinded access, who can change programs. So really, you might need, in certain situations, you might need certain people just to run the programs, but they need blinded access. They can't see that. You can define that, who can see that output in those particular folders, and then you can use that to make sure you're not unblinding information, at the wrong time or to the wrong people. So that's a quick overview of the statistical computing environment and some of the features. I'm going to jump into now the metadata repository. Excuse me. And this is used by the data management group, also the biometrics group, to transform your protocol into an electronic data repository, as well as to ensure standards are followed. So instead of just having these in Excel spreadsheets and other types of documents, it's actually going to be in a formalized system where it can be tracked and you can enforce standards, within programs, across programs, corporate libraries, as well as sponsor-specific libraries if you're a CRO. So it allows you to track all the information in your metadata repository. And we'll cover the following objectives here. What is MDR? What's it used for? What are the different roles that are available throughout the process? The MDR governance process flow to make sure things are going to be compliant, as well as identifying the main modules of the system and showing some of the different components. So what is metadata? What is a metadata repository system? It's basically electronic storage and tracking of all data about the data. That's metadata. That's what's described here on this slide. There's no clinical data here. It's the information that describes the data, but it's important because this not only is important for data capture on the upfront, it's also important for driving efficiency and standards downstream in SAS programming and generating the data sets, the tables and listings. Makes for a much more efficient process. So having it in place in one repository also enables the enforcement of these standards to make sure that groups are following what the corporate standards are for data capture, data collection, and for output. So a little bit more on what it is. Again, it allows you to integrate the data with other systems so that you can manage the collection from various resources. The key element here is you can use MDR to drive multiple different data management systems. It's not necessarily tied to any one program or any one vendor, but it allows you to ensure consistency across all your programs, potentially across all your sponsors. And it really helps with simplifying the process around collection, analysis, and all the way down to the submission process. So why use an MDR? Basically it's your repository for your CDISC and data standards. It helps avoid rework, and it promotes more of a modular approach to data capture. There are data capture standards in place from CDISC, and companies also have other data standards they want to use. The MDR actually centralizes all this information so that accountability, traceability can be leveraged to increase quality and compliance. And that's really the main goal here, is you want to make sure that the standards that have been developed by CDISC, and they're fairly well defined, are actually used and enforced. So most people understand what CDISC is and what the standards are, but I think they struggle with enforcing that across all their programs, all their studies, and that's really what the MDR is, because it's not necessarily, again, tied to any one particular vendor or system. It allows you to say this should be the standard, and if I'm using multiple vendors, that's great, but they'll all use the standards that come from the metadata repository. And it helps with all the other information needed about your protocol, right? So it's going to help reduce cycle times, because the build time is going to be much quicker, because I'm designing from a standard set of forms and a standard set of fields and attributes for those fields and forms. So that's going to reduce the time. I'm not reinventing the wheel every single study. I'm not, maybe varying from standards and have to have different levels of review for that. And it stores all this information about the clinical data and how it should be captured and reported. So it's not just the initial input of that data from your studies. It's also downstream effective and how that data should be reported on the way out, and that's important to as well, because it's both about efficient data capture, but also making it efficient to report this information, once a study is completed and once you have to submit this data to the FDA. And again, there are many different standards that we have out there, and these just a few of those. But having that one place to store and track and update these is one of the key features. And I think anybody that's been through this and has dealt with multiple studies or multiple programs realizes the difficulty in trying to maintain this when data is stored or standards are used either non-compliantly or across many different programs, and there's no real tracking of what's going on. So here are three key roles and responsibilities in MDR. We have the data standards analysts, and that really is the person responsible for the creation of the standards, the metadata libraries, and making sure that that standards are followed in the system, right? So they're kind of the owner of the standards, and they're review programs and studies to make sure standards are being followed. You have the clinical database programmer, and they basically create studies in the system. The SIMS is study instance metadata, so it's basically a study. And then you have the administrator, the organizational administrator, that defines the master data sets, the roles, user access and management. So three main users in the system, one more on the standards and review and approval side, one more on the programming side, and then an overall administrator. As you can see here, both the data standards analyst and the programmer have different roles. This data standard, the DSA is going to create that library, following whatever the governance process is. We'll release these standards once they're ready, and then during the process, they'll ensure they're being copied or used correctly, and then they'll go through a review and approval process. On the right side, the programmer will actually leverage that standard and that collection to actually start their study instance, create any study-specific modifications. So there might need to be a change for a particular study. And then we have the ability with MDR to import the results of this study and the metadata into EDC or other downstream consumer systems. So you actually can use this as a way to design your forms in a standard environment, irregardless of what your downstream EDC system is, which again will enforce the standards that you want to have. It'll also enforce consistency across all programs and vendors. The other key feature of MDR, it interacts and drives standardization with many different input and output systems. So from standards for CDAs to standards in your forms and data dictionary design, EDC, MDR is at the crux of all that, and it's there to help enforce those standards and make sure that you can leverage this information on a consistent basis across all your programs. Okay, I'm going to go in a little more on the features of the metadata repository. So this is the main dashboard. All studies, what we call study instance metadata, and all catalogs are tracked here. All requests for tasks that also can be assigned to your data standards analyst are all tracked in this one dashboard. And you'll see here there's two studies up there and the instances that have been created. There's the metadata collection, which are the standards that need to be followed, and there are a request in there. So basically, this is kind of the overview of what's going on. It'll give you an idea of where they are, and I'll go into a little more detail about some of the statuses and the color coding there that'll help you determine what's going on, what the status of all my programs are and my studies. So the action toolbar at the top, provides for the different functionality. And in this example, the programmer dashboard will allow you to see all the details that are there, the reports, any comments, any issues that are any of the studies that you have access to, and the ability to kind of navigate down to where you need to get to. The SIM section, basically, this is where your studies are stored. This is where you create studies and where the studies that you have access to. You can see their status, so they're color coded, whether they're in what particular area, are they under review, have they been approved, and are they haven't been approved yet. So it kind of lets you know where you are in your workflow of developing the metadata about your studies. And the SIM catalog is actually where all of the approved studies reside. So these would have gone through the process. The programmer would have developed them. The data standards analyst would have reviewed them and approved them, and now they're in the catalog and they're available and to be used, because they've been approved, they followed the standards that you have in place. So you can use these libraries also once they're in the catalog, the study instances. You can use these as libraries to copy for other studies since these have been approved. So this allows you to reuse and enforce consistency across the program or across the corporation because you have standards in place. They've been vetted and reviewed, and they're now easily available here in the catalog. The metadata collection status field shows where the studies are in their life cycle and in their progress. So you'll see there you have candidate, incomplete. There are different statuses to let you know what's going on. In progress basically means it's being developed. Candidate means it's been completed but not approved yet, hasn't been reviewed by the DSA. And this provides visibility into the standards to avoid using either any non-approved or out-of-date standards or standards that are still being developed. Until they get moved into the catalog, you'll know where they are in their life cycle stage there. The candidate's waiting to be approved, and if it's approved, then it gets moved down into the catalog, and that's available to be used for whatever study is appropriate. And requests, this is basically the dashboard to track all the request approvals that you might have for different roles within the system. So you're again, part of the workflow is tracking and issuing requests to know where things are, when are they completed. That's all tracked inside the system. I can issue it through there. I'm not issuing it through email. I'm not sending a text message through Skype. Basically, requests are tracked here, and you get an overview of where things are. Also, this view here just shows you where you can add, SIMs, basically study instances to create, and you'd be able to add that fairly quickly, and then you would then go in and start building out your study instance with all the data domains, the fields, and getting it ready for a review process. Finally, there's the view inside the system here. This is the forms view where you can actually design your ECF forms in MDR. And I talked about this a little bit earlier, but you can use this for CRF development and storage of the metadata about your forms. You then have the ability to export this data to be imported into an EDC system. So what this allows for is I can design it here consistently. All of my database programmers can come into here, and I know that it doesn't matter what downstream system I'm using. I can take that information and export that out, and now I have a standard in place. I'm not using 5 different design tools and having to work with 5 different sets of libraries if I have 5 different e-clinical vendors. The MDR really is designed to extrapolate that into its own system, allow for the standards to be enforced, allow for workflow to take place, But then I can push this downstream, and I can be assured that I can go to one spot to figure out where's my standard adverse event form, what are my attributes of this form, and where can I use this form going forward. So again, it's taking out the variability of multiple different systems and enforcing standards in one spot. So again, this entire system, metadata repository system, is designed so that you can come in and you can get an overview of what's going on in your study setup process and your data and forms process. And it's in one spot, and it's designed to give me that information. It's not just designed to build forms and set up attributes. It's actually designed to give me a much more thorough and review of my processes. Okay, that is pretty much it. Margot, I'm going to turn it over to you to see if there are any questions.
Yes, well, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. Now I'd like to invite our audience to continue sending in their questions and comments using the question window for the Q&A portion of this webinar. We've already received a few, so we'll jump right into them. Our first question from our audience member is, what are the benefits of custom-built versus off-the-shelf for MDR and SCE?
It's a good question. And basically, the title of this is customizing MDR and SCE. It's different. The benefits are these systems are different than, say, some of the other e-clinical systems like EDC, which are more off the shelf or commoditized. Each company has their own workflow that they want to follow, and putting a more formal process around it, like the SCE or MDR development, allows you to basically fit it to a particular customer's needs. So there's some core structure in place about workflow and document storage or whatever, but you need the ability to match it or model it after your own particular needs and requirements. So instead of saying you must conform to a system's workflow that's predefined, you can actually with the off-the-shelf or with the customized approach, you have a core that you start from, which we showed you today, but then you also have the ability to localize it to your needs. And then from a workflow standpoint, since you have, this is an internal process in most cases, you need that flexibility so that you get adoption by your users and they don't end up going around the process because it's a rigid or limited system that you might have off the shelf.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that answer. Our next audience question is, what are the efficiency gains you have seen using SCE?
That's another good question. So we've developed this for several customers, and what they've expected to see and what we've been able to see is anywhere between 35–40% efficiency gains on the development of the code itself because of the reusability, the standards in place, as well as efficiency gains on the when you have to rerun or regenerate the code. Because data is coming out, typically when you're generating output, it's done in multiple iterations, you're doing test data. So, and there are changes along the way, and there's feedback. So having the traceability, the ability to automatically relaunch and then track the status of all your output, all the code, all the logs, and be able to automate a lot of the process, that results in fairly significant efficiency gains. And it could be even higher than, say, 40%. It depends on the standards that you employ in your system.
Thank you. And our next audience question is, how long does it take to implement either MDR or SCE?
It's another good question. It takes anywhere between 6 to 12 months based on user requirements. Again, we're coming with a core set, so it's not like you're building from scratch, but we can then add on the particular features and workflow capabilities that you might need that meet your exact requirements. So that's a good rule of thumb. It's something that you would take time in doing if you're doing lots of studies, running lots of programs, you definitely need some system to keep track of it. And we think in that time frame we can definitely generate and deploy an SCE or statistical computing environment for a customer.
Well, that looks like all the questions that we have for today in our questions chat box. If you'd like to send your questions privately, you can do so by using the email put up right now on the screen. Also, you can feel free to share this webinar with the link in your chat box. We thank everyone for participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, please join us in thanking our speaker, Stephen Picardo. We hope you found this conference informative, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.